for episode 87 of the rental roundtable. We had on Leonard St. Germain, 47 years in the equipment industry, just retired a couple months ago. 28 years at H&E. He was there when there were 5 locations, growing it to 105 locations. Last 7 years at Bottom Line, which is one of the fastest growing independent rental companies in the country the last decade or so, working with Kurt there. And ton of awesome lessons. I told Leonard it's the least amount of questions I've asked in the podcast because it was just nailing it. And I was just taking notes, and he just kind of distilled, like I said, 47 years of experience in the 47 minutes. And his big takeaway was hard work and good things will happen. So really appreciate Leonard and everything he shared today. And if you're looking to build a career in rental or understand what it takes to be successful here, I think you'll enjoy this episode. All right, everyone, welcome to the Rental Roundtable, episode number 87. We've got on my friend Leonard St. Germain. Leonard, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks, Cal. Appreciate you having me, man.
It's good to have you. You got quite the story. You're now retired. It's
Yep.
been how long? 2 months, 3 months you've been retired?
Yeah, about 2.5, 3 months. Yep. Yep. Still getting used to it, but it's not all bad.
Yeah. And you worked in rental, how many, was it 30, 35 years or so? How long you worked in rental
Yeah,
for?
well, I actually been in the equipment business. I was just calculating, as I didn't put a piece on my resume. I've been in the equipment business like 47 years. So
47 years in equipment.
yeah. So it's started off field, but it was equipment as well.
Mm.
So I kind of counted that, but a long time. That's all I know.
You have 47 years of lessons in the 47 minutes here. So give
Yeah,
us a
that's right.
crash
There you
course.
go.
Everything.
Well, I hope I can perform.
Well, I know we were talking, don't never wish your life away, but do you miss rental? Are you happy fishing and hunting and being retired?
Kyle, it's you miss the people and the camaraderie and
Yeah.
and I guess really and truly a lot of people, and I did for a while. Is it's kind of even tough to say. It's like you kind of miss being needed. If that
Yes.
makes
Right.
if that makes sense. Called upon, liaison. Advice, whatever. So I still get that, but not as frequent as I used to day to day. Which you miss that to a degree, but there's a lot of other things that fill those voids as well.
For sure. And I think if you're a really well balanced person, you realize there's more to life than work. But, in
Yeah,
America,
absolutely.
we're all productive and achievers. And a lot of people retire. My dad retired for 3 weeks and went back to work. Some people
Yeah,
need the call. You got to work. Some people
yeah,
wide that
I
way.
I get it. And I wanted to tell you, and I mentioned it. My wife the first couple of weeks. It's like you just don't seem happy. You just don't seem happy. And we stumbled
Yeah.
across a couple of friends of ours at lunch. And, she was telling, him that one of the guys that, and he goes, he says, I did the same thing. I retired, I sold my company and he goes, we're programmed to provide and to
Yeah.
protect. And when all of that changes, you got to adjust. So it was an adjustment, but like I said, I'm getting used to it. It's,
Takes
it's,
time.
it's not bad though.
I bought my dad for Christmas. I bought him a book. It's called The Second Mountain, and it's really around your
That's
first
cool.
mountain. I'm in the middle of the first mountain. You're climbing it, and then, you know, you transition, right? And you're
Right.
not the main provider. You don't need to work, and
Right.
it is a different mountain. And if you think you're still
It
climbing the
is.
first mountain, that's where you get in trouble, right?
You do. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to, right now I've always been a pretty organized person. I always, had a cliche, short pencil is better than a long memory, and wrote everything down
Yeah,
had a list. And I don't have that today. But
yeah,
I've been telling my wife, I got to, I know in my brain, the projects here and there that I want to try to get accomplished. But right now it's just been, enjoying hunting season and, 4 to 5 of my grandkids are playing basketball. So it's running in between games on different nights of the week and weekends. So it's having fun. It's like I'm on an extended vacation. So
yeah.
it's been
Well,
pretty good.
Well, I love equipment rental. I've only been in this 5 years, not 47, but there's more to life than rental. And
Yeah,
my
no
but
doubt.
my dad would remind me. He would say that the word retirement is not in the Bible. I'm like, well, okay, 2,000 years ago they weren't. They didn't live that long.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's really I kind of got had to get used to people telling me congratulations. It's like I thought that was like a normal kind of a normal attrition to what you did once you quit working, and I kind of realized that it's not for everyone. So I mean I'm happy with it, and I always kind of knew I could
Yeah,
from a time perspective and a kind of a I got to stay busy. So it's
right.
I can't sit idle. So I'm either tearing something up or fixing something or doing
Yeah.
something, So
Well, congratulations on
thank you.
climbing the first mountain, and
I
also,
appreciate it.
you're at the bottom of the second mountain, right?
I'm I'm
You
enjoy
gotta
I'm
start climbing
enjoy
that
the
one.
view for the moment.
Yeah.
I'm enjoy looking at the second mountain.
There, maybe don't need to
That's
climb that
right.
one.
That's right. That's right.
Well, tell us about your story. So, you started turning wrenches, became equipment manager. You worked at H&E for 28 years, worked at Bottom
Yep.
Line for 7
Yep.
years.
Yep.
Tell me
Yep.
how you got into this crazy business.
Well, it was like, I got kind of thinking about, this podcast and, I didn't even, kind of add that to my resume, but, I graduated high school in 1978, grew up in a, single mom family, oldest of four. So I always had to kind of help provide and steer and become a man real young because I was
Yeah.
13 years old when that happened. So went to work very, very early, and if I wanted something, I either had to go earn it or build it or do something. So it was, you know, that was kind of, I think, as you learn, and one of the deals that, we'll talk about at bottom line was culture index, and you get into understanding yourself. And what I really understood was it's nurture versus nature, So if you nurture, we could have the same profile. And if you nurture it and have a little cushy life, or at least a safety
Yeah.
net, you kind of turn out different than you are if it's nature. You're pushed out of the nest and it's either fly or die. And so that's kind of how I felt, So, when I graduated high school, I went directly to work. I went to work in the oil exploration business. I was doing, we were building marsh buggies and operating marsh buggies and drill rigs and a lot of that stuff. But then it hit me, in 1979, I was in the middle of that and had an opportunity. We were doing some work and I had an opportunity. They were renting boats. So I actually opened a rental company in 1979. It was L&M Rentals, my wife, Leonard and
Oh,
Mary Rentals. And we bought, half a dozen boats, nothing super expensive or extravagant, but we're renting boats to the offshore exploration business up until 1983 when that was a major, you know, oil crunch, drop out, you know, the sign in, South that was here in a little off town, Morgan City, there was a sign at the city limits that said last one out, turn out the lights, and that's how bad it got. So, did that, but that was actually kind of ironic that I thought about that. I kind of lost that in my memory bank, but, did that all exploration. Again, I was turning wrenches, driving trucks, driving operating equipment, doing all of that. So I really got a feel for that. I did that from, like I said, 78 to 83, about 5 years. And then, when the lights went out in the oil industry, I started looking around for a job and this equipment manager job came up. Pretty large contractor. At that time it was, 350, 360 pieces of, equipment scattered around, two or three states doing primarily levee construction, flood protection, highways, these big retention ponds for these chemical plants and stuff. So I had, pretty decent sized, you know, company and it was pretty interesting, to get in there and do that. And the guy that owned the place was a stickler for details, man. I mean, he was, which really taught me some discipline and really, if you're going to do something, do it right. Cause the guy was just, at the time, I thought he was crazy, but you'd go and there'd be a line of dump trucks and you're only supposed to see one because they're all supposed to be lined up together and, in line and lined up and just perfection. It was just a matter of, making sure everything was right. So I learned a lot there. Opted to leave in 1989. I had developed a relationship with the Head and Inquest group, which was, previous, to H&E. So Head and Inquest at the time, at the equipment company I was working for, had a fleet of Komatsu dozers, D65s at that time with pyramid pads were very popular. But they also ran a couple of, Manitowoc drag lines, and so I'd had a relationship with all of the guys that Head and Inquest H&E. And in '89, when I decided to leave, I, kind of reached out to them and they said, sure, we'd love to have you. So I started at, the Head and Inquest H&E group back in 1989. And I came in as a shop foreman, that's what they had at the time. So just come in and, you know, we'll work you through and get you here, but this is what we have today. So that's kind of how I started. So I was living about I lived about 65, 70 miles southwest of Baton Rouge at the time. So I drove into Baton Rouge every day, and I was managing the overall shop. All of the scheduling and the work and the procurement and just production safety, tooling, fixed assets, all of that that goes with that. And then it wasn't long, they had an opportunity pop open in the warranty department, so they gave me a shot at that, so I started managing the warranty with all the manufacturers, throughout the whole company at that time. I think when I started at H&E, there was 5 locations, so it's not super broad, but, big enough, and, multi-manufacturer. So I did that for probably, fairly short time, and then the safety director that had been there for a long, long time decided to retire. So they said, "Hey, you'd make a good safety director." So they put me in as what they called a product reliability and safety director. So at that time, I was doing all of the new equipment demos. We'd go deliver a piece of equipment. I'd go out and demonstrate it, how to use it, and what to do, and all of that kind of stuff. And, actually, you know, managing the safety, all of the safety for the company. And during that time as well, I became, uh, OSHA accredited to do maritime inspection, crane inspection. So I was leaning, although I was in the dirt side of it, I was also on the crane side as well. So I would do, OSHA maritime inspections all over the country. And then there was an opportunity that came up. So here in Baton Rouge, there's Exxon Chemical and Exxon Refinery. And at that time, Exxon Refinery was like the second largest refinery in the world. And they were very stringent on equipment inspection and crane inspection. So I got pulled into a contract in Exxon, through H&E. I was contracted into Exxon to do all of the incoming inspections for all contractor equipment and everything entering the refinery. I was in charge of inspecting that. And then it grew to, okay, we want you to inspect all of the Exxon equipment as well. So I started inspecting all the Exxon owned cranes, forklifts, jib cranes in the warehouses. I mean, it just blew up to, you know, it was pretty hectic. So it was, did that for a while, and then it became, there was a, head and Equus at the time, or H&E at the time, was kind of first call for crane rental within the Exxon. So somebody in the hierarchy of Exxon decided that was kind of a conflict. They didn't want me inspecting H&E cranes, that's okay. So opportunity came up. The general service manager. The company was growing. We were expanding stores and things of that nature. So my next job there in about, I think it was about 93, I was promoted to general service manager for the company. So I was managing, all of the service functions, technicians, recruiting, training, tooling, budgets, all other things that go with that. So managing that piece of it, uh, did that for, uh, you know, I think I was general service manager a couple of years, and I was promoted to vice president of service. So had started at that time, started doing some, had an inquest. H&E was growing, expanding wings all over the place, and doing some acquisitions. Acquired uh, South Texas equipment pretty early, Martin equipment out of Dallas pretty early, Coastal equipment, uh, and then in up to about 2005. Uh, like I said, I was a VP of service, and then in '05 we had grown to the point of, that's when the rental piece really took off with H&E in about 1999. They created what they called the H&E High Lift division. Brought a lot of people in, did a lot of greenfield startups, did some warm starts, actually did some, greenfield startups as well. Brought some pretty heavy hitter folks in the industry to really expand the aerial business. Primarily, it was aerial, which then migrated into gen rents and what they were until they recently. So, but I did that till did the service side of it till 2005, and then as we regionalized and started putting different people in different places, they felt that I would be better served than what they call the vice president of operations. So I was at that time I was managing, all the facilities, doing all the design build the suits, the leases on the facilities, rolling stock, fixed assets, procuring, specking, getting all that put together, environmental. At that time, it was prior to any type in-house counsel. So I was working with, counsel, different attorney law firms and attorneys around on environmental issues, workers' comp issues, risk and things of that nature. So I always, joke about it that, I was responsible for all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. So, but it was, again, I took every step of it as knowledge and very valuable. And, just I look back on my career and I go, wow, I had a great opportunity. I was lucky in a lot of ways to be put into that situation and really grateful for it. So, uh, you know, did that up until about 2010. And then I'd always been a kind of a, not saying internet, but online commerce and things of that nature. So things were changing. Internet and customer portals and all the stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
you're in the software business, how that is all was evolving. And so in 2010, they came to me and asked me to look at our web space. How did we go to the internet? Um, how do we expand our capabilities? So they gave me a title of vice president of the equipment services group, and at that time, that entailed uh, managing all of the dispersals, the fleet dispersals, and at that time is probably. I think the fleet at that time was about 30,000 pieces. So it was some bulk disposal. So we were running uh, I was managing the corporate sales, the international sales, the broker, the wholesale, doing all the auctions, uh, and also trying to push the internet and e-commerce perspective of the business
Mhm.
as well. So that was the position I had until I left in the end of 2017, and so. Uh, you know, I decided that, I'd been there a long time, 5 locations when I started. I think there was 105 when I left and publicly traded, went public in 2006. I was always a part of the acquisition team, the due diligence teams, the integration teams, in whatever we did, whether it was a greenfield or a merger and acquisition. One of the biggest ones when the ACM, ICM, and the H&E group merged together, and trying to go public pretty quick with that, and the market conditions were not
Yeah.
where they needed to be to make a successful IPO. So waited, did it, and then finally, took the jump in '06, I think it was, to become public. So I'd kind of, again, I 5 locations to 105 in the growth, and I just felt that it was time. I don't know, it was great company, great people, great friends of mine. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't say anything bad about it, and decided to leave. And I'll tell you a little story, that kind of made me kind of change my view. I always thought that I'd retire there, and headhunters, they always knocking, and I always ignore. And I don't know. I answered the phone one day, and this guy, there was a huge distribution law company looking for a CEO. The CEO was replacing himself to retire. And long story short, I pursued that and got down to, it was me and one other guy. And the other guy actually worked with the CEO in a previous environment in business, and he selected that guy, which was fine. But it really made me feel good about, just always underestimating, I guess, my knowledge and experience in the business. And it really opened my eyes on, hey, I got a lot to offer. So I decided to step out. and go do something different. And, you'll see, I stepped out and met with a couple of people, didn't really know what I want to do. I joke about it all the time. Took a little time off. It was the first time. It was kind of my pre-retirement practice,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I took off a little time. It was great. No cell phones, no emails,
Awesome.
a minimal, and I joke about, the most stressful thing I had going on in my life was trying to be first in the carpool line to pick up my grandkids. So that was, when I knew I could retire when the time
Yeah.
came and the opportunity arises. But I knew I had to go to work. So I was, talking to, a couple people in the industry. Quipli shares one of them. I went to meet with Jadwick and Willie a couple times and and then, Kurt Degater, bottom line, came along. He and I really, hit it off. It felt good. Uh, and, I made a decision to go to work with bottom line. And kind of the same thing. Kurt says, look, man, I don't have anything today, position wise, you come in as the director of sales. That's what you do, you know, and, and so I did. And then, short time later, we bottom line launched EOS, and I'm sure you're familiar with
Mhm,
that.
mhm,
So, uh, with, launched EOS, created, started building org charts and, areas of responsibility and accountability and, all the things that go with that program. And, in a short time, I was the vice president of the company. I was managing, the entire company. So, uh, you know, with EOS, you set your 5-year, 10-year goal. We set a 5-year goal of doubling the company in size, and we took off like a rocket, man. I mean, we were not scared. I promise you. We
mm,
were building fleet. We were, expanding areas. We were looking at, greenfield startups. We knew that, the DFW market was something, we always wanted to be in. Curtis said it many times. We wanted to be in that market. Uh, so during that time, we expanded and grew and did a little acquisition, a little M&A, bought a company out in San Antonio with 3 locations, opened 2 locations in the DFW market, kind of greenfield startups, and was rolling and running and gunning, and COVID, you know, Co- COVID came to town and, we joke about it. We were at Con Expo. We were in Con Expo, and the world shut down. So they shut down Con Expo early that year because of the epidemic. So we all said, well, we're going to stay an extra day or two and just try to strategize, because we know it's not going to be 2 weeks. And so we sat in the hotel room and threw it on the board on what do we need to do as it relates to you know cash, you know, revenue, people, all of the things that go with, managing your business. So we put together a plan and, did not lay a single person off during that time.
mm.
Uh, you know, managed cash, had more cash on hand than we ever had, did some refinancing, did some different things to really strengthen the balance sheet and position us for when it was, finally over and we could see some daylight, we'd be positioned to move in a pretty quick direction. And we did. So it was a matter of, you know, doubling the company. We got close, before I left and it was, like I said, it was a great time, a great learning experience, a great climax to my career per se. And they're still churning and burning. I see I, bought a couple big packages last December, into this year, and they did the same thing again this year. Bought some, just geared up big time in December, waiting on to come in, February, March when the sun shines and the dirt's dry. So they're poised to, take off again and run and gun and continue to grow it. So I don't know, you know, Kurt's in game or exit or whatever. But he right now he wants to grow that thing to 800-pound gorilla, and so he's he's rolling with it, and the company is, it's like everything else. People start seeing what you do, and you're doing well, and it's a niche. The niche has always been, bottom line specialty attachments. So it's getting, anybody can rent a bulldozer, anybody can rent an excavator, but you rent an excavator with a shear on it or a pile driver or whatever. Not many people do that. So it's being that, doing what other people don't. So that was, like I said, that was, it was fun. And again, I was very appreciative and for the opportunity to do that. And then, like I said, it just got to the point, Kyle, that, I turned 65 and, you know, like your dad, there's life on the other side or there's life between the mountains. So I,
Yeah,
I was like, my wife had been kind of, advocating that I do, and I kind of always plan to go to 67, but it was like it was just time.
yeah,
It was challenging since COVID and not a lot of fun. They were fun
yeah,
times, but they were challenging. And then it got to where uh, you know, the human capital piece of it, the people, I mean, it's just got to where finding people with common sense or finding people that, have work ethic or people that, it just got difficult. It just seemed like it was more and more and more challenging to find, you know, people. And I just, like I said, I just got, I think God knocked me on the shoulder and said, "Hey man, you might want to go have some fun." So that's kind of how it happened. But in a nutshell, that's where I come from.
yeah. Very well. Very appreciative of you sharing all that. It's probably the most quiet I've been on this podcast because
I'm
you
sorry.
just
I
no.
didn't mean it. I
I
didn't mean it to tone you down there.
no. I cut people off if they're getting if they're not very
Okay.
interesting. And
I got you. I got you.
no, that amazing story. 28 years at H&E, seven
Yep.
at bottom line. What do you think? I'm going to start with H&E. Then I'm going to get to bottom line. But
Okay.
you grew from 5 locations to you were there from 5 locations to 105 locations. What was this? What was the secret sauce? Or what was this? Why were they so successful? They obviously got acquired last year. They were a big name. You were there for early on. Why were they so successful?
Well, it's all about vision and plan. So, when I started working there, Tommy, of course, was the CEO, John's
Yeah.
father, and really a very disciplined, very wise businessman. I mean, he started that business. He was a crane salesman for another manufacturer along the Mississippi River and noticed an opportunity along that river and jumped off as an entrepreneur and built that business. So that drive and that tenacity and that vision, a visionary. He was a visionary, just like Kurt is with bottom line. And that's,
Mm,
when we talk about culture index, he's a visionary. So was Tom and so was John. And so was, I call him John Jr., but John's, youngest son that was the president. I mean, they're all visionaries in
mm,
making that growth. So H&E, even when I went to work there in 1989, had a rental fleet. It was a small 200, 300 piece rental fleet, but they were in the rental business, primarily rent to sell. You put it on rent, you pay it down, you get your down payment. So really grasping and understanding the rental business and the margins and, uh, distribution business, people used to hate it that were in the business, the high level business or the aerial business, it's a commodity and people hated to hear that, but it's a commodity. And a lot of times in today's market, it's the low cost provider that gets the deal, not the person
mhm,
with, the better service or the better response time. It's all about price. But I think that when John took the business over, he knew, well, saw, a dilution in the distribution business. And I think, he's a smart individual and saw, the difference in margins as it related to, your bottom line and a rental versus a distribution business. So at that time, and it still is today, parts and service and product support in a distribution business is your absorption, areas that supposedly, if you're doing it right, parts and service absorbs the expenses and sales makes the profit. But profits, margins continue to shrink in the distribution business. So he saw, where it's going and, it took him a long time to divest, the distribution model, but pretty much got rid of, they were the, I think, if I recall correctly, they were one of the first Komatsu distributors in the United States. Became a
Mm,
Komatsu distributor in like 1975. So there's some long term relationships and roots with that. And also, they were the growth crane, distributor until Manitowoc came in and bought them out. But they were the largest growth crane distributor in the world for 10 years run. I mean, just it was the area. You're looking at refinery row and chemical plant row up and down this Mississippi River. Houston. So it was just it was an environment and a location. As well. But even that, the cranes as H&E rolled up the rental business, the cranes were a thorn. High OAC returns, minimal or just marginal returns, uh, you know, assets that were hard to retail, from that perspective. So there were a lot of obstacles in renting cranes. So that was kind of the first decision was to divest the crane distribution business. So that's, Manitowoc came in and bought that business. They MGX, MGX was created. There's no I don't think there were any players in the country that had the appetite for the size pie that was out there in that
yeah.
environment. So, they had to come in. I think Manitowoc had to come in and do that. That's just my opinion. Come in and took over that business. So that was a big, you know, breath. It was like, that was huge.
Mhm.
So that was that piece of it, and the next big piece was Komatsu and the earth moving stuff. The other ones were the working distribution, some of the smaller lines were not as critical as Komatsu and the Grove Manitowoc line. So the Komatsu one took a longer time. They as you know, and you saw it in the news, I mean they sold to the Brandeis power guys.
Yeah.
They sold the Arkansas territory to them, and then recently the WPI Louisiana territory. So once and that's what they had been telling Wall Street all along was the intent. The intent was to become a pure rental play. I can't remember the
Mhm.
exact term that Brad used, but it was a pure rental company. And I think that's what stymied them for a long time on Wall Street is just the dilution of the distributorship within a rental business. I mean, it dilutes your margins, and they're all looking for return on investment.
Yeah.
And it just, even though you can look at and pick it, dissect to know and understand what the distribution versus the rental returns were, it was still, I just don't think that Wall Street was sold on a hybrid model because that was the
Mhm.
message at one time. We're going to be a hybrid, and then they went, "Oh, that's not going to work." So we need to be a true rental company. So it
Yeah.
was, it was, full steam ahead to divest distribution and become a
Yeah.
full rental company. And I think that's when, I said it for a long time is, you sit and you got a stock that's trading at, hell, anywhere from, $30 on average, 30 to $35, where you sit looking at a Herc at that same time, similar model, similar size. I say similar size, a little bigger than H&E, but still H&E was, I find was, really prim and proper for lack of better ways. I mean, great technology, always looking to improve, CRM and automation and e-commerce and all the things that go with that. But just looking at it from a Wall Street perspective, it's like it's very undervalued. So I knew there was a timeline that when they really became the true rental company, that things would change and there would be either they would acquire or be acquired, and the rest of the story
Mm.
there. So
Yeah.
that's
You
kind of
mentioned
in a
you mentioned one thing I wanna go back to is,
sure,
the first thing you said was what made H&E successful and bottom line was they had a visionary leader, and a lot of
right.
rental owners or CEOs listen to this podcast, and the question I have is, what makes a great, rental visionary? What about those leaders that made them so successful or so great?
Well, a visionary, if you're not familiar with Culture Index, you ought to kind of look it up. So a lot of people today, as EOS kind of spread
Yeah.
throughout the marketplace, so did Culture Index, and it's a great tool to really, I always wondered, why I did certain things or acted certain ways or whatever. And when we first were introduced to Culture Index, I was the second person within Bottom Line to do the survey. So I did the survey, and Hunter Patan,
Hmm.
was he said, "Man, you want me to sit with you on the results?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So it's a B. Are you familiar with it at all, or no?
I'm familiar with EOS. Tell me about the culture
Okay,
indexing,
so
though.
Culture Index is kind of it's a tool that really shows. It's kind of like the DISC surveys and some
Mm.
different personality trait survey. So this is an A, B, C, D, and then there's some a couple other little pieces to it, but really the A, B, C, D. A is your there's a median, and then you have above the line or below the line or to the right or to the left. You really didn't want to say above or below, just not to create any kind of issues. But a lot of times, if your A's far to the right, aggressive, assertive, you're moving at 100 miles an hour. You're not looking in the rearview mirror. You're rolling.
Yeah.
So if you're on, one side of the line, that's what you do. If you're on the other side of the line, you're good in a team environment. You want secondary reinforcement that you're making the right decision or whatever the case may be. So visionary is a high A individual, very
Hmm.
aggressive and very assertive. So then your D is your social, is how you manage social. So normally a salesperson is a high B, very sociable, can talk, to anybody, never see a stranger, walk into a club or a meeting or whatever and, you know, not meet a stranger. Whereas a low B individual, which I'm a low B individual, my B's very across back to the line. So was Kurt's. Mine was a little further over. So it's not that you're non-social or whatever. You just protect your environment. You have a very small circle of trust. Now that B can be moved. So just like we're doing today, uh, you know, I can move my B over to become very, very social. We start talking about fishing and hunting, my family or whatever. My B
Yeah.
goes to the right and I can
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
very, very social. But I'm I'm a skeptic, and I'm hard to believe the first thing that comes out of your mouth just because I'm a skeptic and a low B. I'm a
Mm.
protected environment.
Hmm.
Or C is how do you manage multitude of activities? A low C person is a multitasker, a high energy, you know, doing 100 things at one time kind of person, whereas a person with a seat to the wider line is kind of a one step at a time. Don't interrupt me until I get this finished, or I might not be able to finish it like you want me to. So that person is, repetitious, accountants, those type people. That's what
Hmm.
they're made of. And then the difference between a visionary and an integrator, I'm an integrator based on the culture index. So Kurt and I shared high A's, low B's, low C's, but where we differ is in the D, which is detail and regiment. So my D is off the chart to the right, very detailed, just like I made mention earlier. Sharp pencils better than a long memory. I'm going to research everything. I'm going to have the answer for. I'm going to have, he always joked about we'd be going into a meeting, and he's like, "Well, what's this?" Because I'd always be prepared. I'd hand him
Yeah.
notes or
Yeah.
whatever. Where the difference between a integrator and a visionary, Kurt's a visionary, is his D. His D was back to the left of the line, so a less detailed person, but he's smart enough to know that you got to have the detail. So he would just get
Yeah.
somebody else to do it. And great
Hmm.
salespeople and great visionaries, because the difference with my D, if if I was turned down or told no or met an obstacle, I would spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out why. what happened? What did I do wrong? How do I change it to the future? Do I have a new
Mhm.
approach? Did I say, just you are beating yourself to death trying to figure out why'd you lose that deal or whatever. Whereas a person with a low D, it's like next, we moving on. So,
Yeah.
one of his most favorite sayings was, you know, I got 100 ideas. Not saying they all good, but I got 100 ideas, and and that's the difference. So the
Yeah.
visionary sees things, you know, he sees things, whereas I was always, you know, that's not going to work. Or yeah, that might work if we do this. If we thought about that, or how do we get it to here? And here's the plan: A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
Where he was just like, let's go do it, and then off to something else. So that's
Yeah.
a visionary perspective. It's like you just see things
Mm.
differently, and whether it's real or not, that's still TBD. But
Yeah.
they see things so different, man. So
Yeah.
different.
Well, I like working with integrators like you. I think I'm a little bit like Kurt. So I got my my COO, Court, if he's listening to this, he's always I got an idea, 100 ideas. I'm not
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
any of them are any good, but he's always like, "Hey, this is not going to work." I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I don't even need you to tell me if they're going to work or not. We're going to do it.
yeah.
And there's a balance, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, and it is. That's exactly what it is. It's a balance. If you got a good integrator and a good, visionary working together and really aligned in the same deal, I mean, it's powerful,
Yeah.
dude. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
powerful combination. And yeah, I mean, to see, just again, it's just if you have, I'm telling you, you ought to ask Crowley, because Crowley was Dan was kind of where bottom
Yeah.
line discovered Culture Index. He had Patrick McHale, which
Mhm.
is he manages and does the Culture Index stuff, and they did a presentation at one of the meetings, when they brought it back, and then we adopted it, and really, I mean, it's a survey, it's a tool, it's a it's powerful. Look, 'cause usually you sit back and you look at, you sit in the interview, what you gonna have? You got a resume and a gut feeling, on the person's presentation, their body
Yeah.
language,
Right.
that kind of stuff. Whereas this culture index really lays out a foundation of how this person is wired, and
Mhm.
will they succeed in a in a multitask environment? Maybe not, maybe
Yeah.
so. So it's like I said, it's a great tool. If you hadn't done it, you oughta if you can have Crowley close to you, you ought to ask him about
Yeah.
getting a complimentary survey done.
Yeah.
It
I'm
would
gonna hit him
be
up.
it would
I'll be with
I
him in
think
2
you
weeks.
should. I think you should, man, because it's like I said, it's a powerful tool, man. It really
Yeah.
is. It really is. And it helped me
Well,
understand myself, because I
right.
you know I mean, I came home after they were going through the explanation. Do you like to do this? Do you like to drive fast? Do you like to do this? And like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm looking
Yeah.
around, that when it was over, I said, did you call my mother or something? I mean, how do you know me like that? Just through this little
Yeah. Yeah.
survey, but it's powerful.
I've taken surveys like this. I know exactly the type of person I
Yeah.
am. I am not detail oriented. Why I have a podcast, we
There
talk
you
to
go.
people
That's right. I like
but
it. I like it.
Kurt's a great guy.
Yes.
At TRA 18 months ago, there was a Texas Rangers game and we were just talking. We talked for an hour and a half. I don't know, he
Oh
probably
yeah.
doesn't remember who I am, but,
Yeah.
you said he's sort of lower social. He wasn't at the game. We were talking
No,
for a
no,
while.
he'll turn it up, man. He'll turn it up, and but he's done that to me many, many times. Yeah, I met this guy
Yeah,
Kyle, and he talked to me at the ball game. Call him up and see about it quickly. See what he wants to do.
yeah,
Whatever. That's how he would roll.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
I got it. Here you go. Here you take this one.
yeah,
So,
and here are my
but
other 99 ideas, with that,
yeah, that's
right?
right. That's right. And by the way, can you do this or can you fix that or we ought to do this or we ought to go there, whatever. So, but yeah, it's
Our
it's
yeah. Our
it's a
our
crew.
CTO our CTO and COO, they're both high integrators, and they gotta keep
Yeah.
the ship together while we're off
Oh,
doing
yeah. That's
podcasts and
right.
stuff, right?
That's right. That's right. So Coach
So,
Index might do you some good, man. I mean, that might,
yeah, I wrote
like
it
I said,
down, I underlined it. I think,
yeah, yeah,
I think what you've talked about, why these companies successful, ultimately, was the leaders, but the teams and,
yeah,
you and Kurt are divergent on the detail oriented. I mean, that's a
right.
great pairing, right? That's
Yeah,
why you guys
that's
work together
correct.
so well.
Yep, yep. No doubt.
Well, Leonard,
No
I
doubt.
appreciate you coming on here today. It's been an awesome episode. Last question I like to ask everybody:
Sure.
you got 47 years of experience, but best career advice you've gotten that helped shape some of your success in your career?
You know, I always, it's really a simple message, man, and it's not a, I preached it to my kids,
Yeah,
and we have arguments. All I say arguments. We always, my wife and I, it's like I feel that I have been very lucky in throughout my career. And
yeah,
she argues. She says, "No," you says, "You worked your butt off. I mean, you worked your butt off. You traveled. You work 80, 100 hours a week for a long, for weeks and weeks and months. You traveled around the world. You stayed gone. And I've always, really the message that I've given my kids is, work hard and good things will happen. And, really and truly is you have to grasp every opportunity. You have to look at, even if you don't like it, or you don't like the way it smells or taste or whatever, you just got to take it and look at, how can I make something out of this? Or what will this add to my repertoire? How, what's this? So really it's just a matter of, God, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier with people, it's work ethic.
yeah,
I mean, I work to survive, and then I work to provide for my family, and I wanted to optimize every opportunity that was put in front of me. So,
yeah,
and I want to be the best. I mean,
yeah,
that's just me. But I think in a nutshell is work hard and good things will happen. So it's working hard and committing to the project.
yeah. I love it. Well, 47 years later, I love that's the message, right? And
Yeah,
that's
I
the
hope so.
message. That's the message that A players are going to want to hear.
I hope so.
Not everybody's going to hear that, right? But I think that's the
True.
key, right? Why
That's
you were
true.
so
That's true.
successful. There wasn't
That's
any
true.
shortcuts. 47 years of hard work, straight from high
Yep.
school,
Yep.
and you did it.
Yep.
Well,
Did it.
thanks for coming on here, Leonard. I think it's a
Appreciate the
record for
opportunity.
least amount of questions I asked, and I said it in a positive way
I'm
because
still here, man.
I got a whole list of notes here. But I appreciate
Okay.
everything you were sharing today. Thank you, Leonard.
Hey, anytime, man. Thanks, God. Appreciate it, buddy. Bye bye.